Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to the podcast for this week. For anybody that is new, this is my weekly podcast where we discuss interpersonal dynamics and relationships, specifically post discharge from a rehab or recovery program. So we ended off last week in the private channel talking about the worksheet on codependency. And before we jump into that, I'm just going to do a quick introduction so that those who are new or who are watching for the first time, that you guys know what the My Rehab Cafe private unsearchable Facebook group is about. And if any one of you want to sign up or want to join, then you're more than welcome to just send us a message and we will help you with that. So welcome to the My Rehab Cafe video podcast, everyone. The My Rehab Cafe private and unsearchable Facebook group is the aftercare branch of the My Rehab group of dual diagnosis addiction centers, or ARC as it was formerly known as. The My Rehab centers are private, inpatient drug and alcohol rehab centers that offer high quality healthcare with high quality outcomes. The My Rehab Cafe Facebook group has exclusive access to loads of content that isn't available on any of the My Rehab public channels, which you're probably watching from right now. Some of the content includes workshops, lectures, and support groups hosted in conjunction with some of the treating providers at the My Rehab inpatient centers. These treating providers are psychologists, social workers, wellness counselors, and volunteers who have extensive experience in the field. Group members also participate in movie and book reviews and from time to time face-to-face events. If you are not a member of the My Rehab Cafe, you are likely watching this on a public channel. This means that you will have about 10 to 20 minutes with us or access to this live broadcast before we switch over exclusively to the private and unsearchable My Rehab Cafe Facebook group. Remember to sign up and join the My Rehab Cafe, guys, as this is where the interesting part of the live videos happen. The My Rehab Cafe is free to any person that has been through the My Rehab inpatient process. If you haven't been through the inpatient process, but you want to find out how to join the My Rehab Cafe, please check out the My Rehab Cafe website, which is www.myrehab.com. That's www.myrehab.com. If you want to participate in this workshop that I'm going to present now, please join in via video or audio via the link in the comments section. Or you can leave a comment and I should be able to bring it on the screen. If you are a My Rehab Cafe member and you want a higher degree of anonymity or confidentiality, then you can just wait for us to end the broadcast on the public channel before hopping on or posting. I'll make an announcement when we're switching over. With that, let's get started. All right, so I'm going to review the worksheet that we did last week a little bit for those who weren't able to stay on with us on the private channel. I think just because it was quite interesting work that we looked at, and I think it's something that anybody can benefit from. So at the end of the day, codependency as a whole is about dynamics of relationships where two people become interdependent or codependent on one another. We obviously see this a lot in active addiction, where we find that, one party is being enabled or being supported in an unhealthy or destructive way by another party. That can be a family member, a friend, a romantic partner. But at the end of the day, this codependency really causes both individuals or both parties stress, distress, concern. There's often could also be a lot of manipulation and a lot of control in codependent relationships. And that is something we really try and work hard at, either preventing or mitigating when we are doing our family work. I think this is not only applicable to substance abuse or addiction, this can also play out in many other situations, but I think it's something to take note of. So at the end of the day, the worksheet that we're looking at is then focusing on this codependency roles. But before we get that, if Kirsty can maybe pull up the worksheet for us. Sorry. So I'm going to not do the introduction part. If Kirsty, if you can just slide down to the bottom of the first page where it says characteristics of the addicted or traumatized family. So we see codependency relationships or codependent relationships often forming in traumatized families. So that means that the family is either going through or have gone through a very traumatizing experience. Obviously, addiction in its own right is quite traumatizing for the person in active addiction, as well as for the family or the close relatives that are almost dragged into the person's active addiction. So the worksheet specifically, focuses on this traumatized system that comes from mostly from addiction itself. So it shows how the family kind of copes with the lack of security, the lack of predictability, the chaos, the unpredictability that often comes with addiction. And it shows the polar extremes in which families try to adapt and try to cope with this, like I said, unpredictable or very much destructive type of patterns in the relationship. So the first one where they said high intensity versus shutdown, and this is just a very quick recap on last week, is technically where they are referring to families that become extremely where there's quite a lot of control, there's a lot of confrontation, arguments, discussions that are quite distressing and uncomfortable, versus the shutdown or dissociation where the family can take on the opposite role. Instead of fighting or arguing or having disagreements, there's a lot of avoidance and a lot of quietness or lack of talking, of communication about what's actually going on. So again, it can either be very emotionally overwhelming, and I'm going to try and see a few of the words here that it's a fight or flight type of situation, or then, like I said, it's a very much a shutting down type of response. The second one, where they say you can either work on over-functioning or under-functioning. Sorry, I hope you can't hear the traffic that I'm hearing. So the over-functioning or under-functioning, they say in a maladaptive attempt to maintain family balance, some family members over-function in order to compensate for the under-functioning of others. So some family members kind of step in and they say, you know what, because the person in active addiction is maybe neglecting or rejecting some of their responsibilities, I will swoop in and I'll take control and I'll, like I say, compensate for this person's role in the family, which obviously puts a lot of pressure onto that person who is compensating. So that person now needs to step up and take even more on, which obviously can also affect their well-being. Or you get more of the under-functioning, where the person kind of says, well, you know what, if that person's not going to bring their efforts to the party, then I'm also going to withdraw. And then the whole system kind of falls apart, because then that person essentially, or the whole system essentially, becomes dysfunctional. So like I said, either you have one or two people in the family that's not willing for the system to fall apart. They've maybe worked too hard or put in too much effort to allow for the system to fall apart. So they then step in and assume those responsibilities. Or then on the other hand, like I said, they completely disengage and they say, you know what, if you can't beat them, join them. And that, like I said, can also make the system very unmanageable or dysfunctional. Then, if we scroll a little bit down, we go to enmeshment or disengagement. So, again, enmeshment is very much what we're talking about when we're talking about codependency. So, the family almost protects one another, covers for one another till the death. So, everybody is in cahoots, everybody is in agreement that they will protect one another, even if it is to detriment to the system. So there's obvious denial that kind of runs through the entire family, where there isn't really the option of admitting or acknowledging or talking about the truth, because everybody in the system is in denial. And like I said, is saying, you know what, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to make a big fuss or try and address it. We're just going to passively move on and kind of try and cope. Without really trying to change anything. And like I said, that causes that enmeshment, because if you're caught into that, it's very difficult to get out of it. You might find that one person really wants to change things or wants to break away, but they are often then condemned for that. And we find that kind of in cult-like situations as well, where everybody should share the same belief system, the same rules, the same, the same expectations, which doesn't always work. Or you get disengagement on the other hand, as I said, where basically the family, or here it says the family members see the solution to keeping pain from the inner world from erupting as avoiding people or situations. So this leads to an emotional disengagement. The family member moves into their own emotional and psychological orbits, and they don't share their inner worlds with each other. And this may give rise to convert, where a couple or family member, form these things, convert bonds, where, like I said, there's kind of a theme of avoidance. So not everybody is on the same page. Everybody is kind of just focusing on themselves and doing their own thing, having their own routine, which causes then a lot of disengagement. And it's funny sometimes to see or to be able to notice that two people can share a household. I mean, they live under the same roof, but they are completely disengaged. They don't know what's happening in each other's lives, in each other's routines, in each other's workplace or studies. And that's obviously a cause for concern, because that can cause, especially if children is involved, it can often cause a lot of misunderstandings and confusion. Then we looked at impulsivity versus rigidity, where we said the family can kind of either panic and then start making a lot of impulsive decisions. So the family is not really thinking things through. They're not considering pros and cons. They're kind of acting on emotions and making, like I said, very impulsive, sometimes high-risk decisions without really consulting one another, or, like I said, really thinking or talking things through. Or you get the family that becomes very rigid, and that's, again, an attempt to try and control, attempt to try and survive the chaos by saying, you know what, we are going to follow an extremely set routine. Everything is going to be worked out. There's going to be no surprises, no spontaneity. Everything needs to be checked in with beforehand or needs to be agreed upon. Even if the person in active addiction isn't following that routine, the family kind of tries to cope by keeping the family system together by following this very set routine, and then not being willing to compromise on that at all. So they said, yeah, rigidity is an attempt, that causes or that to mitigate chaos both inwards and outwards. So there's no middle ground where strong feelings can be talked over or even explored. It's kind of, we won't tolerate any uncertainty. So again, impulsivity versus rigidity. Then we also have grandiosity versus low self-esteem. So the family, again, can then also try and compensate for what's occurring by trying to cover up or trying to deny the reality of things or the current stance of things by boasting, making up stories, kind of really exacerbating about whether that be their finances or their children's performance in school. So they are trying to pretend that everything is fine and that everything is positive, but in actual fact, behind the scenes, a lot of things are falling apart. And I think we all know individuals or families like that. We've all engaged with families, where they would say one thing, but the reality is that most people around them know that that's not really the case. There is a lot of other, or are a lot of other problems and issues. And like I said, that can then, they can try and cover that up or overshadow that with focusing on positive things, but then also often making up certain things. And in low self-worth, the family can also fall into kind of a complete depression state where everybody in the family is suddenly doubting themselves, having a depressed mood, feeling anxious, like I said, having this low self-worth. So the family as a whole is projecting that out to the world to say we're not okay, none of us are coping. And it's kind of a reflection, obviously, or a more accurate or true or authentic picture of what's actually happening inside the household. And then the last two, just before our time runs out, is denial versus despair. So much the same as the grandiosity versus the low self-esteem. Some families are in denial, like I say, deny till you die. They don't talk about anything. They don't acknowledge it. If people ask them directly, they would, dismiss any kind of indication that things are not going okay. And unfortunately, it's that denial that often feeds into a person's bad behavior, because if it's not being addressed and if it's rather being covered up or not spoken about, it's much easier to continue with that behavior. Or the despair, like I said with the previous one, the low self-worth, there's no denial. The family is very much projecting their despair and their hopelessness, but that can also affect people around them. So their colleagues at work or their friends or so can also pull away because they are feeling as though, they're overwhelmed with this person's despair on things that are going on at their household, which they're not really acknowledging or talking about. Then it's a little bit hidden in between the paragraphs, but there's also one about caretaking versus neglect, where the family can, again, some people can split into the caretaking role, where they become very compassionate, understanding, empathic. They kind of swoop in and take the role of the rescuer, where they're going to, address this person's problems, try and fix everything, versus the neglect, where the family member can say, you know what, I'm not going to take in the caretaker role. The person is making their own choices. They should face their own consequences. I'm going to disengage and let them, handle or manage things by themselves. So there's almost no support from that family member. There's, again, not an acknowledgement. There's more a distance and a disengagement. And then the last one before we switch over to the other channel, I think more or less our time is more or less going there, is abuse versus victimization, where obviously we can start seeing cycles of abuse, where they say, yeah, abuse is part of the impulsivity that characterizes families, where feelings are acted out rather than talked about. So there's a lot of overt conflict or arguments that can almost border on that form of abuse, which also probably provides the person struggling with the addiction with more reason to go and use the substance, because they are feeling somewhat abused, and it can lead to the family pulling away even more or abusing even more because they're feeling as though nothing is changing. And then in the same breath, they talk about the victimization, where they said, that on the other hand, you often find people that become passive. So instead of fighting, they kind of start to identify and perceive themselves as victims. And that victim mentality, as well, won't necessarily change anything. So it says here, so rather than identifying and feeling their own helplessness, sorry, I'm falling in here in mid-sentence. So But I think, like I said, more or less that summarizes it. Either the family becomes very abusive and, like I said, overt, and there's a lot of conflict and arguments, or again, the family kind of takes in this very victimized role where they are constantly talking about how they feel abused or taken advantage of, but there's no active efforts to try and change that. So, okay, I rushed through it a little bit, but for those that missed the private channel last week, at least you had a little bit of a taste on what we were talking about last week. But we're going to switch over to the public channel now. So for whomever was watching, thank you very much. I really appreciate the support. And then next week we will see each other again. But please, if you are interested to hear more, please sign up to the My Rehab Cafe. And for those who are signed up on the My Rehab Cafe and who's going to switch over with me to the private channel, I'll see you on the other end. Thanks so much. Kirsty will take us over to the other end.
What's up, guys? My Rehab Helper here. I want to tell you about a refreshing approach to a process of self-discovery for anyone that's just left a rehab program for substance abuse issues, or for anyone wanting to engage with a community of others on a journey of self-discovery. The My Rehab Cafe initiative is a thriving community focused on sobriety. You'll find that this group is thriving and full of conversations and discussion on what is working for those who are staying sober. Some members have used 12-step programs and others have never stepped foot into a meeting, but they all have one thing in common. They are serious about quitting drinking and leading a better life. New members often express how friendly, open, and welcoming the community feels, even more than they expected. We achieve this by fostering a community built on trust and fairness, with policies in place and enforce a no jerks allowed policy. We will make a point of getting you plugged in and connected with the community, and all this with the understanding that you want to be here and the expectation that you will put in the effort and participate in the group. Members gain access to recovery resources like worksheets, online lectures, online Q&A sessions, online discussion forums, online workshops, linking with an accountability partner and the My Rehab podcast. In My Rehab Cafe, you'll get advice and tips from members who have been sober for years, from those who have been where you are. They have a tremendous amount of experience to share, but so do you. We have chosen to grow this group slowly, paying attention to who may be a good fit and who may not be. This group may not be for everyone, and that's okay. Those who realize it's not about what you get from the community, but what you can give, are the ones who we see being the most successful. Those who ask questions, share with others, attend webinars, and get out of their comfort zones are the ones who benefit the most from this private online community. Thanks for listening, guys. My Rehab Helper, over and out.